So welcome. This is our second meeting for the Consultancy Specialist Group of the BCS using the GoToWebinar software. It's still rather new subject to us. You'll find us fumbling around at times to try and make it work properly, and hopefully the end result will be worth waiting for. I'm Simon Wallace. I'm one of the committee members. We also have on the screen Alan Moore. He is the chair of the specialist group. Antonio, who is working the technology and will be at the controls and watching out for your inputs. And of course the speaker, Carole Osterweil, who I'll introduce a little bit better in just a moment, just to run through a few things first. So Carole is talking about developments in neuroscience for consultants and project managers. If that's not what you wanted to listen to, you've signed up to the wrong event. Our next session after this one is on Thursday the 23rd of July at 6:30 again, and this time it's Alan speaking to us on strategic engagement of IT and business, roadmaps and managing demand. You'll find information about all of the events and more details about what the content's about if you go to our part of the BCS website. There is quite a number of exercises and bits of interactivity we're trying to do. We were hoping that this session would be much more interactive, and we're kind of limited a bit by the software. But you might find it useful to have a pen and paper ready to make notes at times, and we will be asking you to fill in polls. The polls will inform some of the conversation, and most importantly, there are some times when we're looking for an audience feedback on a particular point, and we'd like everybody, if they've got something to contribute at those moments, to use the question system to feedback to us, which is why we were looking for it just now. We are recording the session. We don't normally include the attendees' voices or video in anything that we transmit. We haven't even got them turned on, so we can't do that. The only thing is that we might mention your name if you've said something on the questions and we reply to you, so you could just about be identified. Be careful what you say. And the slide pack you're looking at today is not in itself going to be shared, because the materials are all available on Carole's own website. We'll mention it again at the end, I hope. Remind me if we don't. The website is www.visibledynamics.co.uk. That's all one word. Visible Dynamics is one word. .co.uk, and there'll be other places you can find that if you need to. So let me just tell you very briefly about Carole. She's a best-selling author and consultant in the rapidly developing field of how neuroscience explains many of the everyday frictions and problems in change projects. Projects that feel increasingly like walking through fog. She teaches how an understanding of how our brains really work offers a range of different ways of helping you and your team cope with these challenges. Well, I'll leave Carole to explain a bit more about what that's all about. Carole.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about Visible Dynamics and so on. Visible Dynamics I set up as a company at about 5-6 years ago, and this was really a reflection of the work I had been doing for many years previously, which is around always troubleshooting on transformation projects, really. And one of the things that I had come to the conclusion about was that the thing that catches most of us out most of the time are these, what I would describe as invisible dynamics, that stuff that's going on underneath the surface in relationships with people on projects. And that really set me out on a mission, which was about how do we make these invisible dynamics more visible so that us as consultants, project managers and so on can actually start to do something about it. Oh, hello, that's a nice bit of feedback. And so my aim in this session today is really to be discussing with you how these invisible dynamics arise. I want to give you a flavour of how the human brain works, because when we start to, I discovered through my own studying about 10 years ago, when we start to understand how the human brain works, then we can really start to manage these dynamics better. And so my thought in designing today's session was to give you an introduction to the human brain, and then to talk about some of the ways dynamics play out in different organizations, and to give you a sense of how you might be able to influence them. And now what's been really interesting since publishing the book is that I've come to discover, I think there are some people in the world who get the people stuff really quickly, and there's other people who find it incredibly daunting. And so a big challenge for anyone who understands how the relationships between people work is, how do I make this stuff, which seems to make very obvious to me, how do I make it make sense for others? And I can smile with a huge relief and say, Alan, I'm so pleased you're back. Could you switch us on to the next slide, please? Lovely. So essentially, just to kind of summarize what I was saying then, my aim for today is to give a flavor of how the brain works, because it will help us explore lots of issues around uncertainty. And I'm guessing, and again, we'll test the ground a little bit about this in the future, but I'm guessing over the last 12 months, or even the last 3 months, the amount of uncertainty that each of us is dealing with has skyrocketed. And I want to use the session to help you really reflect on your own situations and come up with some ideas for how you'll be able to apply some of these notions and ways of thinking to yourselves in the world of project management. And my experience is, once people get stuck into doing this, what we get is better outcomes, higher productivity and less stress. Better outcomes, higher productivity and less stress. That is my promise or my hope for you today, that I'll be giving you a route to that. And Simon, in introducing this, mentioned that I'd written a book, this little book here. I'm not going to be plugging it a lot, but it's subtitled, the main title, Project Delivery Uncertainty in Neuroscience. And its subtitle is A Leader's Guide to Walking in Fog. And what's very interesting to me is, when I first presented to this group several years ago, I was talking about walking in fog as a new approach for managing projects. And it's a phrase which comes from the work of Eddie Obeng, and he contrasts what it's like to be walking in fog with a very traditional approach to working on projects, which is one he would describe as more like painting by numbers, the theory of how 50 years ago or 40 years ago projects should be run. You know, you just kind of put in the outline, slot in the colours, and it all turns out exactly where you'd like it to be. And as we hear more and more about the volatility and uncertainty and complexity in the world, if you like, the fact that we're working in a VUCA environment, which I'm sure you're all very well aware of, I think the notion of walking in fog becomes even more pertinent. And Alan, if you can switch me on a slide or two, please. Okay, so there we have the fog. And what's become absolutely clear to me, as I've been, Alan and Simon have mentioned that I teach sometimes, I also coach an awful lot of people. And I think since publishing the book, I've really come to understand that whilst I always used to find being in fog challenging, but quite enjoyable, there are many, many people out there, consultants and project managers, who don't find it just challenging, but find it hugely challenging. And I think the biggest and probably the most important revelation to me is, most of us, a lot of the time, dare not say how challenging it is. So there's a sense of, I'm walking in fog, I wonder who can see I don't really know what I'm doing. Now, that was Carole's experience. It may or may not be yours. How do people know I'm feeling my way? And if I was to own up to it, I might say it in private, but what might happen in public? And I think this is a huge arena, which is really important for people. So can I ask you, Alan, to move us on to a poll? And Simon, there's a poll there too. Oops. So this is what I want to ask you. If you think about your work today, what percentage of it is foggy? That is, it's not 100% clear, or even 70 or 90% clear exactly what it is you're meant to be doing. And you can see the choices there, less than 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 75, and way over 75%. So can I just ask you to complete that poll? And Simon, you'll be able to track as the results are coming in. So when you're ready, perhaps you can play back what comes back. That would be cool.
Yeah, we've had 85% of the audience vote so far. Probably the other 15% are off doing their emails or something like that. Up to 89%.
so far.
We're doing quite well. That's over 90% now, so maybe I'll give you a couple more seconds. All you have to do is click on the options and press submit. And okay, I think it's stuck at 93%. I'm going to close that poll. And there you go.
So what's that telling us then?
So 20 to 50% answer is by far, not by far the most popular. The middle ones are the more popular. 40% are 20 to 50. 32% are 50 to 75. At the tail end, over 75% only has 8% score, and less than 20% is indeed 20%.
Okay, so I find that really interesting. One of the reasons I find that really interesting is I had expected the answers to be skewed up to the 50 to 75%. And so I'm also wondering what that says about you as a group and what you're doing and how used you might be to walking in fog, if that makes sense. So what other people might encounter as being very foggy, maybe not so foggy to you because you're doing it all of the time, which is fine by me. But can we go on to the next poll? Because I'm interested about how this compares to previous years, 5 years past. And again, it's the next slide as well, Alan. So has the percentage increased? Is it about the same or has it decreased?
So we're a bit over 89%. I think this is about as many as we got last time. So I think I will call it closed there and we'll have a look at the results. So most people either thought it was increased or about the same. Relatively few people here saying decreased. So that's 17% have decreased, 40% the same, 43% increased.
Okay, and again, I'm interested in that because I had anticipated it would be higher. And again, and I'm intrigued because I'm thinking we're operating in the world of COVID. And yet it doesn't seem to have increased the fog markedly. For attracted you, it's curious, and I'm saying I still think what I have to say is relevant. I should say, so I'm not going to pack up and go home now, even if you're secretly hoping I do. So I'm going to carry on, but again, I'm just interested in that figure, in that set of figures. Now let's just move on to something else. So I'm interested also. I mentioned before that I would be talking about how the human brain works, and when I do that, I always need to know who else is in the audience. So I'm interested in your experience. Alan, can you wind us on a slide and can we go to the next poll? And then we'll come to the end of polls for a bit, people. So which of these best describes you? How much do you know about the brain? Is it nothing at all? Did you perhaps study a little bit about it at school? Read a bit about it? Or maybe you've got a PhD in it. You've studied it vastly at university, and maybe you're like me and actually understanding how the brain works informs everything that you do. So again, can you just answer that? Give me a sense of who's here.
Okay, so it's just coming up to 90% answered there. So I'm going to close that. And there you go. There's a lot of people who said they've read a bit. The other answers are fairly low. 68% now said they've read a bit. I studied it at school, actually. Sixth form.
Yeah, and that's good. I'm pleased. So some people, a lot of you have read a bit. What I'm guessing then is what I'm going to talk to you about now. My plan is to introduce you to a model about how the human brain works. And Alan, this is another cue for a slide. And it's not my model, it's a model which is called the brain in the palm of your hand, and it comes from a chap called Dan Siegel. Now Dan Siegel is over in the States, and he's very, very well established in the world of neuroscience, in the world of understanding all about the developing mind, actually. So he's one of the people who was involved in coming up with the first definition of the human mind. If you have come across Daniel Goleman, that's a name I expect many of you will know in association with emotional intelligence. I often say they're best mates. Well, I like to think they are. They kind of work together. So Daniel Siegel is in the same category as that. And what I'm going to do now is give you a model which may well summarize some of what you've read before, but whenever I explain it to people this way, they find it helps them visualize how the brain works. And I really want you to follow along with me. So I'm going to be waving my hand around, and I'm going to assume that each of you sitting in your rooms, your homes, your offices are going to be following along and waving your hands around too. And if this sounds absolutely bananas to you, I want to tell you that your brain has more than one kind of memory. It doesn't only memorize your thoughts, but it also remembers your feelings and your physical actions. And therefore, if you follow along using your hand, you will remember it better. And it goes like this. When we think of the brain in the palm of your hand, just hold your hand up in front of you, like I'm holding mine up in front of you. If it sounds okay for people, it's like a big echo. Oh, has that gone? Okay, so hold it up and look at the palm of your hand. Now, this model says your brain, the human brain, can essentially be thought of as having 3 parts. And I'm going to walk you through what those parts are. So take the fingers of your other hand and trace around the palm. Yeah, so trace around the palm of your hand. And the palm of your hand in this model represents your primitive brain. Now, your primitive brain is responsible for all of your body processes. So how fast your heart is beating, I should say, how deep or how shallowly you're breathing, your temperature, when you need to sleep, when you need to eat, just everything about your physical self. And your primitive brain connects, just take your hand, your finger now, and trace right down to the crook of your elbow. So your primitive brain connects through your spinal cord and your central nervous system to the rest of your body. Now take the thumb of that hand and wrap it over the front, and trace from the root of the thumb to the thumbnail. So this represents the second part of your brain, your feeling brain or your limbic brain. And essentially, this is your emotional command center. So it's where many aspects of memory reside, and also where many or most of our impulses originate. Then take the fingers of your left hand, or whichever hand you're holding up, and trace from the back knuckles right over the front down to your fingernails. And can you see how you come into contact with the palm again? So this is the third part of your brain, your thinking brain or your prefrontal cortex. And essentially, this is where all of your logical analysis that all of you people excel in doing, I'm sure, takes place. It's where rational decision making originates. And it's also where the site of higher human functions like empathy and moral judgment. Now, your brain's #1 function is to ensure your survival. That's why you have one. It was new to me when I discovered that, but it absolutely makes sense. And in order to ensure your survival, there's a little piece of your brain. Now, it's an organ you might have read about. It's called your amygdala, which in this model, I like to imagine sitting here right at the root of your thumb. And your amygdala, remember, it's after ensuring your survival, is scanning. It's taking in information all of the time. It takes it in from your body. Has my heart rate gone up? Have I got sweaty palms? Whatever. And it's doing an assessment. Is it safe or is it hostile? And your amygdala is also taking in information through your 5 senses. So it's scanning externally as well, around the room. What's popping into your emails? It's taking in information through your 5 senses. What you see, what you're hearing, I have to remember them now, what you touch, what you taste, and what you smell. And all of the time it's weighing it up and going, is it safe? Is it hostile? Is it safe? Is it hostile? If it detects anything, and this is also important, which based on your previous experience or what you've been told, it thinks might be a little bit hostile, what it does is it diverts some energy away from your thinking brain. And in diverting that energy away, the first thing that happens is there's a response which is about avoiding the threat that might be there. Now, this avoidance response starts with an emotional response. We might not be aware of it, but typically the avoidance emotions would be things like fear, like shame, like disgust, like anger, or like sadness. So these avoidance emotions, a few milliseconds after that started, will then trigger or prime your body to take avoidance responses. Things like getting a bit defensive, maybe wanting to withdraw from the situation, or getting a bit more aggressive, going on the attack a bit. Yeah? So those are the avoidance emotions. Now, most of the time we wander through the day And maybe there's things we don't like too much, and our thinking brain gets taken off a little bit offline. We're all very familiar, I think, with the notion of the fight-flight response, or the fight-flight-freeze response, I could describe it as, which is what happens, you know, if a car was to come speeding towards me, there's a physical threat, and we know our thinking brain would essentially go onto autopilot. So you see how I flick my hands up? I want you to do the same. Do the same with your hands. Flick it up. Know that you've taken your thinking brain offline, and automatic response has kicked in, which engenders a fight-flight response. Big time. Yeah, I've got no time at all to be avoiding this car. We're less used to the idea, and we'll come back to this later on, that the amygdala is not only looking for physical threat, but for social threat. It makes no distinction between the two. And these are the subtle things that go on in interactions between yourselves and other people. And I used to, let me think, an example. If I go into a room, of the old days, visit a bank manager, or you have a boss who wears an aftershave which reminds you of someone that you didn't get on with 5 years previously, you would automatically take your thinking brain offline a bit. And if you really didn't get on with them, based on your previous experience that they were threatening, yeah, you go off completely onto autopilot. Your fight-flight-freeze response will kick in straight away. Now, the other hand is, if your amygdala is doing this weighing up and it detects that everything is really safe, well, your thinking brain doesn't go offline at all. Instead of the avoidance responses, what's engendered there or evoked there are the approach responses. So approach emotions, which would be things like feeling that you are very joyful or excited about a project you're working on, feeling you're well supported and can trust the people around you, that you're taken care of and supported, like a looked after to some degree, in much the way, if you think of a parent with a child, a caregiver would look after that, would look after you. And instead of the avoidance emotions, therefore, these approach emotions are evoked, and with those come approach behaviors. Things like, when our thinking brains are completely online, we can collaborate really well, we can be really creative, and we can learn really well. So if you think about yourselves as change consultants and project managers, do you want your thinking brains online or offline? How aware are you of the emotions which are being evoked in you? Now, I'm conscious I've spoken about quite a lot, so I'm going to ask Alan to move us on a slide. If you would, please, sir. And here in front of you, you should see a slide which summarizes everything that I've said. Yeah, so on the left-hand side there, where you can see is your thinking brain is online, and the kind of emotions which are evoked: trust, love, feeling excitement and joy, and the kind of behaviors that come with that. And on the right hand side, it's the opposite: what happens when our thinking brain is offline. Yeah? Now I just want to invite you now to take a moment or two to just think and to reflect on that, and then actually to think about what's helpful in this model for you. And then perhaps if you would go to, Alan, if you wind us on, I've got instructions to people here to go to the questions box. So use the questions as a chat primarily to start off with. What's helpful about this model? And Simon, as you see some stuff coming through, perhaps you can summarize it. And I'll give you a moment or two to start responding, and then I'm going to ask Alan to move us on to another question. And let's see where that takes us. So are people beginning to write?
First one's in.
Lovely. And Alan, will you bring up the next question as well? So not only what's helpful, but what might it start to explain? And as I ask that question, I'm going to wave my hands at you a bit more and ask you to imagine two people. So now, I hope you can see both. Can you see both of these? So we now got two people. This one on the left is getting rather excited and wants the person on the right to do something, and they're beginning to get a big dictatorial about how they want it to happen. So their thinking brain is going up, 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 up like this, and the impact is not necessarily one that lands very easily. Yeah, how do I feel when someone talks to me in an excited and loud voice, especially if I'm not really quite clear what it is they're asking me to do? And can you see how it could evoke a bit of an avoidance response in me on the other side, and not help me keep my thinking brain online so well? So I'm hoping you can see how just understanding how one person's brain works, and we'll explore more about this later on, actually has an impact on the responses you get from other people. And Alan, perhaps, have you got an example that you would be able to give about people inadvertently getting a bit wound up? She asked, putting you on the spot.
Yes, well, certainly it happens to me quite a lot in that I don't know if this is part of it, Carole, but I'm often accused of being quite defensive, and when new things come to me from people, I don't know, something about it in projects tends to have me thinking, well, what could go wrong here? Where are the risks? And so I that kind of fight-flight thing, I know I have to control, because it's something which kicks in. I don't know if it's unique to me, but it certainly that kicks in on the high-risk IT projects that I'm often involved with.
And what's the impact of that? If someone really wants you to do something and you then turn defensive, what might the impact of that be on them? What do they start doing?
Well, I think the number of impacts. I mean, often the intention is to manage risk on behalf of the project and everybody, but often it can just deflate people. They can go off and try and find somebody more enthusiastic and more on their wavelength. And also, people can get very, very excited in the early parts of an initiative about their ideas, and become blindsided, in my experience, to the risks. But somehow or other, they want everybody else to get excited too. And so when I'm defensive, I'm kind of not helpful, and I kind of risk the longer term involvement of me in it not happening if they decide that I'm actually not on message and not supporting them, and therefore they'll find somebody else to help them.
Yeah, despite that being completely unintentional, because your intention, of course, is to be helpful. And I'm interested, Simon, as some of the questions are coming in, or some of the chat is coming in, what's coming up there? Is there anything that you're able to tell us about?
I think the first observation I'd make is that most people have kind of responded to explanations of the sort of negative side of responses. So why do people behave weirdly? Why do they have a knee-jerk reaction? Understanding why there might be a negative reaction. So it's obviously more telling in terms of, shall we say, understanding unexpected responses, rather than the sort of positive side of maybe thinking more about what would make people collaborative and cooperative and generally speaking happy in what they're doing. It's almost everybody is looking at the understanding negative responses of one type or another. Okay, so I'm going to try an interpretation of 15 responses. I don't know how accurate that will be. But what I'm suspecting is when people are asking why, I'm not suspecting, I'm hoping that what you're saying is actually maybe people are thinking brains are going offline in a way that I had not anticipated. So there's something about, as Alan was saying, there's something about if I get defensive, maybe it's having an impact on someone else. And that's what's causing this. And what I want to do is really to help you think through in this session a bit about how can we help to keep thinking brains online. Yeah, so Simon, does that feel like a good place for us to be taking this conversation, given what you've read in the chat?
Carole, there is another comment that I think might be interesting, which is that this could be challenged with different cultures and norms, which I think might be bringing a new dimension to the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm hearing there is, so Antonio, I don't know where you come from. And I know it's not necessarily your question, so I'm going to put some prejudices on the table, all right? To a man I know nothing about. And I think you're probably looking, and as you're talking about cultures and norms as well, you may be picking up on questions other people have put in and not speaking about yourself. But I think what I could say is, you know, some people in the UK may have some prejudices about some of our Mediterranean colleagues, that they were all kind of far more effusive and talk with their hands and more excitable and all of this kind of stuff, which might be perfectly normal in those kind of cultures. But to people here, So for those of us that like to be more measured, coming up against someone who is that effusive might be quite threatening and might actually mean that instead of meeting them and hearing their enthusiasm, actually it's a bit scary, and that would not help them think clearly. So I don't know if that's useful.
That questioner has just said exactly.
Oh, okay. So that was a good guess. And so there's something about this maybe that we need to hold in mind about what helps us. And so for that questioner and for others, one of the themes going through this is through this presentation, I'm wanting to encourage us to be more aware of what's going on for ourselves. But let me just, okay, so I'm just looking down at my question list here, and I'm anticipating the next one I had as a poll. So my next poll, I'm anticipating, given the earlier ones may not add any more light to things. So I'm going to say, let's ask it anyway. So I'm sorry if it feels repetitive. So coming into this question about how do you find being in the fog? Is it very comfortable? Is it okay occasionally and a bit stressful, or is it very stressful? And the reason I'm asking that is because being in the fog is often something that takes our thinking brains offline.
Well, I think we're getting quite a strong result for the middle option, which I suppose maybe we might have anticipated. So we have...
okay, so it's a bit stressful.
Let me share that with you.
Okay, so look at so I want you to hold up your hand then. Everyone, hold up your hand, put it back into the fist then. And this is what you're telling me. A connection that I may not have made for you, but I will make now is, when we are feeling a bit stressed, what happens is our thinking brain is not completely online. So a bit stressful, I'm interpreting is for, this is how's this for a generalization of 60 people, and probably means you're somewhere between at about the 45 degrees to the vertical and up here somewhere, yeah? Your thinking brain is not completely online. And if your thinking brain is not completely online, then it means you are you're not able to collaborate at optimal levels, you're not able to learn at optimal levels, and you're not able to be creative at optimal levels. And I'm talking about each one of you personally. Yeah? If you are stressed, that is what we're saying. So just give yourselves a minute for that penny to drop then. What does that mean about your performance and about your ability to be highly effective? Those of you that I'm saying, just make some notes for yourself about what are the implications of that. And here, this next slide is called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. And this is some work that was done way back in the 1920s, I think. And can you see how it shows the relationship between stress and performance? And what it shows is we do need a bit of stress to be able to perform well. But if we have too much of it, yes, performance will rise, and then we'll get to a point where we've got enough stress, and all of a sudden our performance drops off quite rapidly. And I want to leave it for each of you to judge and to maybe draw this little curve for yourself and take a view about where do you operate most of the time? Are you right up there at the top on the flat of this curve? Slightly to the right, slightly to the left, or way over on one of the tails on either side? And I'll leave it to you, Antonio and Simon, to read back what's coming back.
Yeah, so far I have a comment from John Beck that yes, occasionally because it's more stimulation, so occasionally you perform better, but yeah. And that's the only comment that I have on this question. Okay.
And think about also the projects that you're trying to do and how the people who perhaps your service, you do your end users and so on, and some of your stakeholders too, and we'll come back and talk a bit more about them as well. What kind of stress levels are they under, and what does that say for their performance? And then I want to just invite you, because I've discovered in my coaching that the language we use is really, really important. So I want to invite you in the next slide just to reflect for a minute about the language you use in your projects and with your project teams. So can you just wind us on again? This is yet another poll.
There were some comments coming in on your last question. I don't know if you want to.
Okay, do you want to just tell us a bit about that, Simon?
Yeah, sure. So it's the first thought is recognizing when stress is getting out of hand. Actually being able, I guess, looking at your graph, being able to spot that peak performance point and not let it go too far is an issue. And also question of how much stress you put on. I think this is something I, as a project manager, would endorse. I think actually there's a limit to how much stress you should put on your team members. Some people think that project and program managers just sort of crack the whip and put on more and more pressure and demand performance, and when people are performing, they demand even more performance and build up stress. And I think it is very easy to push people over the top of that curve. It's a kind of longer version of the observation we see here.
It's interesting hearing you speak about that. I did a podcast with the International Centre for Complex Project Management earlier in the year, and that notion about the project manager who cracks the whip, is he actually helping us deliver these complex projects or not? And often, and the comment from them, from the research that they had done, was that often project managers and change leaders don't have enough flexibility of style, actually. So if we're not getting the results that we hope we're getting, just as you're saying there, Simon, and other people, does piling on even more pressure help? Or actually, does it start to undermine what it is we're trying to do? And we'll explore that a little bit more later on in this session as well. But coming back to this question that's up on the current slide then, and a poll for it. So I want you just to think about your project and your project teams and the language you use, and how aware you are of possibly evoking this stress response. Or do you talk about people in terms of, oh no, we're encountering resistance to change again? They always do that. They never want to do what we want. They're so resistant.
Okay, it's staying 50-50, so I'm going to close that.
Okay, so about 50-50, which tells me that those of you who've done some reading, who are thinking more about evoking a response to social threat, well, your reading's really paying off. For those of you who are talking about resistance to change, I really want to encourage you to think back to here. What it is that you're doing, which may be taking other people's thinking brains offline and evoking that resistance. Because you cannot, if you're evoking a resistance or a social threat in other people, you will not get the results you want. We have to, and we'll talk more about this again as we go on. Resistance, in my view, resistance for change implies that the problem is nothing to do with you. It's great, it's way out there, it's them. But we know now from this thing about how people interact, the invisible dynamics, these issues are never completely isolated from ourselves. I really want to encourage you to think about, how am I contributing to that? And just in case you haven't come across it before, I thought it might be useful if I just spell out what are the sources of social threat, which is this next slide here. So this comes from some work by David Rock. It's very well known for writing a book, Managing with the Brain in Mind, I think it was. And the research says essentially there are 5 sources of social threat, and they go by the acronym here of SCARF. So anything that comes in any interaction you're having with someone, if you do something which might make them feel they are lower down in the pecking order, you're putting on rank, for example, or keep them waiting for half an hour outside your office when you are in the virtual, or you're outside your virtual office before you'll have a conversation with them. I don't know how it works here. A reduction in status will take a thinking brain offline. Reduction in certainty, so if we're less certain about what's going to happen next. So we've seen that enormously, I think, with COVID. It's having a huge impact on the amount of certainty there is about what we need to be doing going forward. A loss of autonomy, so however you're putting your change programs together, how do you actually involve people so they still feel they're autonomous with what you're asking them to do? The R stands for relatedness. So this is about being part of the in group rather than feeling part of the out and excluded group. And the F is all about fairness. Do I feel I'm being treated fairly in relation to anyone else? And as it says there at the bottom of the slide, if any of these things are reduced, it will take thinking brains offline. And so in my view is the 21st century workplace is absolutely chock-a-block full of social threat. But until this work was done on the human brain, nobody really knew what it was or how that it existed. And we now have the opportunity to make this stuff more visible and therefore to be more explicit and think more carefully about how do I introduce the changes I want without, perhaps by helping people feel more certain of what's in store or helping them feel responsible and ownership for what's going to happen next. Are we imposing these changes or not? So I hope that helps you think about what might we be doing, or what might I be doing, which will be taking people's thinking brains offline. And this will go in all your interactions on a one-to-one basis, or you with groups, or you with teams or organizations. So it's an awful lot for us to be holding in mind as we're thinking about how do I approach my change processes. Huh? Oh, I feel I've covered a massive amount of ground again, so I want to give you another moment or two to digest. And I'm going to ask Alan, Simon and Antonio, am I right in thinking that was a lot for people to take in, or should I just carry on?
I'm sure they're doing fine, but I always find myself that taking it in is easy. Trying to remember it the next day is the challenge. So,
so remember your scarf then. Maybe that's all you need to do. Okay.
I think it's a great model, and I guess what I sometimes get challenged with is if I get very heated in that kind of fight-flight problem, I find it difficult to remember these models. I don't even it's only afterwards, in the reflective state, that I think, oh, I got a model for that.
Yeah.
And,
okay, so make sure you nab me before the end, and we'll talk about, if it's not obvious, we'll talk about what we have to do to help us remember them.
Okay.
I'm hoping it will be obvious. Okay, so I just want to move us on again.
We had one question before, maybe it could be interesting, and they were mentioning that we have many factors that are affecting our brains. Are these factors, the question is if they are physiological or psychological or biochemical. So I understand that the psychological factors, you may train your unconscious, and your biochemical factors you might not be able to train. So the question is related to, yeah. Okay,
well, we'll talk about it more. I would say that they are all interrelated, and we can learn to train and rewire all of it. And it's a myth. I think when we think about the brain, we think of it as being kind of mental processes only, but it's not. It's also our whole emotional systems and our physical, physiological, biochemical, neurobiological, and all those other systems. And they're all interconnected and they all work together. Yeah. Okay, so this particular survey, the next slide, I did a presentation in Dublin, and I was quite interested in what came. Another presentation that was done this time last year. This is the Project Management Summit, the pre-M Summit. So 400 people responded to this question about to what extent had they been experiencing prolonged stress over the preceding 12 months. And now I can't read it I'm having to squint in detail. So it was 40% of people said yes. Prolonged stress. It's 40% of the 400. But out of that, the next on the left-hand side, I think it says there are 44% of people who are working in IT projects. So this is a really high proportion compared to 39% for people in architectural engineering and construction. And then when you're down into logistics, it's only 5%. So this notion of prolonged stress, I think, is really important, because when you're stressed, it's taking your thinking brain offline. And if it's prolonged stress, what it means is we're not really able to recover sufficiently to the point where our thinking brain is online all the time. So if you imagine, for example, a bird in the garden that thinks there's a cat around, you know how they kind of dart and their eyes are going and they're thinking, it's dangerous, it's dangerous, it's dangerous. And what it means is they will respond very fast to things which, when they were more relaxed, they would not see as being threatening. And so I think it's quite telling, and I'm curious, and I think that's my next question actually. Oh no, sorry, it's not. But my next question is around prolonged stress for yourselves, or not even prolonged stress, but attitudes to stress and well-being. Because many of the people that I work with, and it may just be the ones that I work with in the IT world, take prolonged stress for granted. And I just thought it would be worth taking stock and think about, in your organisation or on your projects, and what would you or your colleagues say or do if it all became or started to become too much? If somebody else complained about this is too stressful, what would other people say or do? Or is it all put under the carpet and are we having to pretend that that's not the case at all? And so again, I'm just curious about what you guys are going to be saying in the questions there, or in your chats and thoughts on it.
Someone says man up.
Yeah, okay, so sympathetic then. Okay, man up.
Grumble to others in private.
So it's not safe to say, is it? It's in private, huh?
Shut up and put up.
Yeah, shut up, put up or shut up. Yeah. And when we consider that in the context then, here are people who are wanting to say to you, they haven't got the language, but they're wanting to say to you, we are under so much stress that we're actually not able to do our jobs properly. We can't keep our thinking brains online properly, so we will never be able to perform at peak performance, which is what you're demanding on us, and you don't want to listen to it. So an interesting one.
Sorry, so some of the more sensitive people in the audience with more reasonable responses are talking to people about the problems, discussing what they could change, what we can stop, start and continue, let's break things down, trying to be sympathetic and so on. So I think there's two trains of thought here. There's the certainly there's the men up side, and then there's the empathetic side.
Yeah, so a real mixed bag. And for those, and I'm curious, I wish I was in the same room as you because I'm feeling mischievous. For those of you who are saying man up, is that because you're, and I'm not, this is a rhetorical question, but I also wonder whether part of that is because of fear of what happens if we don't deliver. It's like, as it's almost going on the attack, man up, because we've really got to, and it's kind of a stress, possibly a stress response there. Anyway, okay, so I hope I'm making the case that excess stress is unhelpful or can be unhelpful. And Alan, if you could, I just ask you to move the slide on another slide. So this is something that I've come up with, which I describe as the project stress cycle. In the center here, we have a stressed person, a highly stressed person. Could be yourself as a consultant, it could be your sponsor, could be a key stakeholder, could be someone that's more junior. But let me just talk you around it. So what happens when someone is stressed? What we know is we can start following the grey circles there. When we're stressed, it evokes a defensive reaction in us. When we start getting defensive or going on the attack, so an avoidance reaction, when that starts happening, of course, it doesn't help build trust with other people. If someone is being told man up or under attack or just get on with it or whatever, or I haven't got time to listen to all this nonsense that you're telling me, it will evoke some kind of defensive reaction. And when that happens, we will give these people a wide berth. Why would I bother this person with what I really think if I can't trust that I will be treated well by that? And so what happens is communication tends to tail off a bit. And most of the kind of projects that you guys are working on are really dependent on high levels of collaboration, high quality communication, and lots of creativity. And when we get someone who's overstressed, their thinking brain is going offline and they are unable to do those things. And you can see that through that chain of the 3 green circles there. And what happens then? The chances of being able to deliver what you need to deliver go down. And the word on the street gets out. And all of a sudden, sponsors and stakeholders are hearing this, and they are not feeling too happy about it. My project's not going so well. Oh my goodness me, I'm now beginning to feel rather stressed by that. And what happens? They want to exert a greater sense of control. Now, what also happens is, when we're feeling anxious, we start to generalize. And so all of a sudden you will start finding, I've tested it out with lots of people, I'm guessing, sorry, I don't know you will, but I'm guessing you'll start finding stakeholders, sponsors, wanting more KPIs, different metrics, and they want the illusion of being able to control your project even more. And now you're being distracted from what it is you need to do, and you're feeling even more stressed about it. And you can see how it starts to feed a cycle. And then I'm going to be rude, I'm going to make a leap of faith, and I'm going to say, and for some of us, as project managers, we prefer the spreadsheets and the metrics anyway. And all this nice relational stuff we're being asked to do is really difficult. And so when the chips are down and the pressure is really on, instead of stepping out to engage with people more, many of us will stick our heads in the sand and bury them in the thing that we find easier, which again adds to this cycle of stress. And I'm kind of curious about whether any of you recognize this. And I think I've got a question coming up. I've got to double check it. Oh no, I was going to ask you, Alan, to talk about it. So can you give an example from your experience about it? A project stress cycle in action.
Well, I think you've characterised a lot of the projects that I'm on, that or have been on, that you know, that I think projects are often, particularly in IT, are often quite ambiguous when you start off, and I think it's inevitable, because we're dealing with new technologies and often what we're doing has not been done before, that that we'll encounter uncertainties and difficulties. And I think you're right. There is a tendency often to you know, for stakeholders to get concerned and then to want more and more reports. And sometimes maybe your model helps us to understand that perhaps we've just got to that it's not necessarily productive to go down that route. It may indeed be better to bracket our fears and keep going in a less stressed and less controlled way, particularly on creative, innovative projects.
Okay, can you switch us back to the stress cycle slide? Pull forward to it. There we go. One of the things I forgot to say, which perhaps, which I hope you will find helpful to everyone that's listening, is that I hope that what this slide does is it illustrates that stress is not an individual issue. Stress can become systemic. Yeah, and I think that for me, many of the people I work with find it really helpful to think about, so stress is not just my issue, it's systemic, and that means we need to address it in a more systemic way. And in some ways, nobody's at fault when it's a factor, it's something in the system. And so I encourage people to use this to explain what may be going on. And certainly people I've coached who, when they found themselves under pressure to do things that they felt have been really wrong, have been able to go back to stakeholders and say, look, can you see how you might be contributing to this? And we need you to cut us a bit of slack. Not necessarily a vast amount, but it can be a really useful negotiating tool for people, because I think it can be quite surprising to see the systemic cycle play out. So that's one thing that I want to do here. And then I want to go on and just talk about what the solution is. So if you can just wind us on another slide there, Alan. So this solution comes from the world of Mr. Heifetz, Ronald Heifetz, who was writing about 2009. And Ronald Heifetz spoke about the need for adaptive leadership, but I want to put some more bones on it. So he wrote a very well-known paper, I think it's in the Harvard Business Review, talking about adaptive leadership and saying what's really crucial for us, and I put it to you for all of you, is to take yourselves down. This speaks to my misspent youth at the Camden Palace, which was a big dance hall. And I had a friend who used to run the lighting box there. And Heifetz talks about being on the dance floor and knowing how you're dancing with other people. So this couple who are doing some kind of jitterbuggy jive thing, are you treading on each other's toes? Because if you are, you both need to modify how you're dancing. It's not just out there, it includes me too. I'm one of these dancers here. Or maybe it's my John Travolta kind of arm-waving disco dancing style stuff, you can tell my age, which is out of sync, and I need to get it back in sync. So I need to be thinking about me and how I'm working with the people in my team here on the dance floor and how all the different dancers are interacting. But I also need to be able to step back here up into the lighting box, onto the balcony, and look down on the dancers and think, oh, how are they all moving around on the dance floor? What kind of dynamics is going on? Now, when I first came across this model and then started to introduce it to people, people would often think about it. On the balcony, I can start thinking about tasks, I can think about work streams, I can think about strategies. But what they didn't really think about was, how am I actually dancing? And I want to say to you, if you need to be thinking about yourself. How am I dancing? What impact am I having on other people? My thinking brain and their thinking brains too. Okay. Now I'm guessing this all sounds really, really abstract, but I just want to stop again for a second and go for another poll. But before you do that, before you move us on, I want to put it into some context. So some of my colleagues, I do a lot of work with Cranfield, and Cranfield did some research with, I think, a group of about 250 project managers, and they were asking them about how they dealt with complexity, and they were suggesting that there were 3 different kinds of complexity. Complexity which is related to structural stuff, complexity which is related to technical stuff, and complexity which is related to the social and political stuff, i.e. how people behave and why do they behave the way they do. And my next slide talks to the social and political, and it's a poll as well, so can you just move us on? So when delivering change and transformation, I'm wondering, so Carole is wondering, are you really confident that you've got the right building blocks to deal with the social and political dynamics?
Well, it's quite interesting to see the way that built up, because the let's put it this way, all the fastest responses were the no's, and then the yeses caught up afterwards. So something in that, I guess.
And what are the scores saying there?
Oh, let me show you. So it came out fairly evenly balanced, with the ish,
Okay.
ish by getting almost half the votes. But,
Okay.
evenly balanced.
What I'm taking for that is it's only 30% who are saying yes, definitely. At Cranfield, the conclusion, and again, this was the Cranfield group, was about 70% of people felt that they were ill-equipped to deal with the social and political, or that the social and political were by far and away the most complex and most difficult to deal with, and that when they look back on their training, they'd only received about, so professional project managers, only about 10% of their training had focused on the thing that was the most difficult to do. And so I'm just kind of interested in that, into the contrast to this group, which is saying, actually, you have got the right building blocks. And let me explain what was behind that question. Some of the feedback that I've got from the book that we spoke about earlier on, the one that I wrote, is that it helps give people the right building blocks. So understanding how the human brain works seems to help a lot of people picture actually what's going on. So I want to encourage you, if you feel you're lacking in, so I want to encourage you to study more, because as you become more confident with it, you'll begin to understand how the brain works better, and you'll start to see things which would probably pass you by in the past. So that would be my thought with that. Can you wind us on a slide again? Okay, so I want to introduce you now to the notion of cognitive readiness. Now, what was really interesting to me was that I published Project Delivery Uncertainty in Neuroscience, and then about 3 months after I published it, somebody in the States gave me a call. We were talking about it, and he'd asked me if I'd come across this book, which is called Cognitive Readiness in Project Teams, and it's a whole lot fatter than my one. And what was so interesting for me was they had come up with a model which is almost identical to what I've been describing in my book, but it's based on research from the Department of Defense in the States. And what it said to me is, so Carole, you are more mainstream than you realize. There's a big Department of Defense in the state that buys the same stuff, even if it's still very new to most people in the world. So cognitive readiness. So this model talks about different kinds of intelligences. And by intelligences, I'm talking about the ability to understand and recognize and use 3 different intelligences: cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence, and social intelligence. And if people are able to process this use and process this information well from these 3 different sources, what they say is, what the Department of Defense is saying, is it leads to effective or superior performance. So if we talk about what's in cognitive intelligence, now I'm hoping you can read my writing better than I can read it on my little tiny screen here, but it's the ability to process and understand complex situations and spot patterns and apply systems thinking to situations and information. Emotional intelligence is about being aware of your own emotions and being able to manage yourself. So thinking about, how am I actually feeling? What are the emotions going on? And how do I keep my thinking brain online? Yeah, if I'm feeling fearful, what do I need to do to feel less fearful? Clocking during the day, God, I'm really angry with that person. How might that inform my behavior? Managing myself. And then the third type of intelligence there is social intelligence. Knowing what's going on for other people, and how is that impacting their relationships and how they're relating to each other. So being aware of what's going on socially, the invisible dynamics, if you like. But look at this, the 4th ring there is mindfulness. And all of those 4 rings interact or relate to neuroscience. So when we understand how the human brain works, we can start doing better on all 4 of those rings. And I took that as vindication or proof that I've been doing good research, even if I had come to it in a completely different way. Now, I'm guessing lots of you will have seen lots written, and maybe you've read a lot, or maybe you've engaged with it or you haven't, but mindfulness is becoming one of the terms, or some people might think fads, which is being bandied around at the minute. So I'm really curious about you as a group, to what extent, when it comes to mindfulness, are you embracing it wholeheartedly? Have you been dabbling a bit or occasionally? Have you tried it but you're not sure it applies or works for you? Or is it kind of bemused and wondering, not put the foot in the water and just wondering, or not even noticed it's around? So just tell me about the results there.
I'll show you where we are. Yeah, so wholeheartedly 31%, dabbling at 42%, and then not so sure and bemused on 14%. So quite a positive response there.
Yeah, quite a positive response, and 70% of people who are not sure about it. So let me just talk a bit more about mindfulness. One of the things I find really helpful when I'm coaching people is to help them think about, rather than mindfulness with meditation, which a lot of people find really a bit new age and quite hard to grasp, is to think about mindfulness as really developing what I would describe as developing your mindful awareness muscle. So here I'm quoting from Mark Williams at Oxford University, and I think he describes it brilliantly. So he says, if you've got a strong mindful awareness muscle, what you have is a direct intuitive knowing of what you're doing whilst you're doing it. So you know exactly what's going on inside of your mind and body. Oh, my stomach has just tensed up. I'm feeling a bit anxious. And in feeling a bit anxious, I'm not thinking as clearly as I could be, for example. And at the same time, I can also see how this is going. My anxiety is going down in this room around the group of people I'm trying to influence. And then he observes that most of our time, our attention is not where we actually intend it to be. So most of the time, going through our minds, our attention is being hijacked by our thoughts. Oh, so-and-so, this happened last time. Oh my goodness me, will someone be able to spot that I'm feeling very embarrassed about this, for example? By our concerns, by our worries for the future. How is this going to go down if I really tell them what I'm thinking or how stressed I am? And our regrets and memories of the past. So I really wish I hadn't done that, or last time we did that, this is what happens. And all of that stuff is going on all of the time, and it stops us being aware really what's going on right in front of us at this moment now. It stops us, in other words, having our thinking brains completely online. And I think it can be really helpful to be thinking about, how do I actually go about developing the ability to do this, to be more present and more focused? And there are lots and lots of different techniques, of which some of you have obviously, embracing it wholeheartedly, you're obviously doing a lot of. And for others, I want to encourage you at least to put a toe in the water and to know it might feel like going to the gym and discovering a new muscle for the first time. It will be hard work, and you will have to work out, and the benefits are really worthwhile. So I hope I'm making a compelling case for building your mindful awareness muscle there. And Alan, can you take me on a slide? So just to recap, if you've got a strong mindful awareness muscle, you will be able to stop at any moment and go, okay, how am I feeling at the minute? Now, my guess is, and I can't check because you're not in the same room as me, but I'm guessing for a lot of you, you're not used to stopping for a moment and thinking, how am I actually feeling here? Not consciously stopping to think that. Can you take me on again? So this gets a bit fast now. So that question, how am I feeling right now? And with that, how far online or offline is my thinking brain? What do I need to do to get my thinking brain back online? And you guys may also hear of people talking about it's important, for example, to go and take 3 deep breaths, because there is a whole raft of neuroscience evidence which talks about activating the parasympathetic nervous system rather than the sympathetic nervous system. So how the calming part of your body, your physiology, if you like, what do I need to do to bring my thinking brain online? So that was just one idea, using the breath, but there's lots of other different techniques which we can talk about if we have time again. So I'm mindful of the time now as well. Can you wind us on again, Alan? And then if you think about, so my thinking brain's now online, and then there's a bigger question, isn't there? How is my behavior actually contributing to what's going on here? Am I that person in the middle of the stress cycle? Am I inadvertently fanning the flames of complexity? And wind us on again. And what might be going on? And this little picture here is also wanting to encourage you to step back. So I'll tell you a little story about it. Step back and thinking, what's going on in this group of people I'm trying to influence? What's going on around me? And this little picture here talks about bamboo scaffolding. So about 10 years ago, I was working as a transformation director, and I was in a meeting with about 10, to me, I was a transformation director, but I still felt very much the junior party, as I was sitting with these 10 real heavyweights in the health system. And we were trying to implement a project, deliver a project where the goalposts were moving all of the time, incredibly fast. And I was sitting in this meeting getting more and more anxious because the 10 people that I was talking to were wanting to put in more and more control. So coming back to this, trying to create an illusion of control. It was like trying to put, if everything's moving, if we make ourselves embed this in really solid concrete blocks, we can stop it moving. But my thought was, nah. And so I asked them a question, which was, have you ever seen them building skyscrapers in Hong Kong where they use scaffolding which is made out of bamboo, which is able to flex? Yeah? Now, I know it's a metaphor and it's not precise, but I was able to pick up, I had this gut feeling, this is going completely wrong, and I have to name their anxiety in this room. So naming the actual emotional content allowed everybody to reset and get their thinking brains online and think, what's actually going on here? And from that, they were able to make some choices about how to respond. What kind of controls and governments do we need in place? And I put it to you that if you're not able to be mindful and keep your thinking brains online, then you're not able to be choiceful about how to respond. And actually, you will be contributing to the complexity by having this impact on other people around you, which I suspect is actually quite a challenging thought. So I'm going to give you a few moments again just to summarize or to put some questions down, some chat down. And I've got to the end of what it is I want to say. pretty well, so perhaps we just take a couple of questions and then possibly, I'm guessing on the timing, you will probably need to wrap it up fairly soon, but I'll leave that to the lovely committee here. So any kind of final questions or observations from people?
The first one's just adding to your bamboo analogy, because you also have flexible twine to connect the bamboo together, apparently.
Ah, cool. But it's flexible.
Yeah, the second mention here is regarding if mindfulness or awareness is measurable and how this can be linked to the big 5 personality traits or IQ.
Okay, I'm not going to answer that one. It's a long answer, which I think will be specific for one person or possibly 2 out of 50. So I think that feels like a dangerous one to try to respond to. But if they want, whoever's asking that wants to have a conversation about it offline afterwards, do drop me an email. I'll leave my email address. All right.
Somebody would like you to repeat the 3 areas of complexity.
Oh, I bet so. Okay, so I'm going to hope I get them right. I definitely know 2 of them. There's structural complexity. And again, I'll happily structural complexity. There's another one I think which is around technical complexity, but you can nab me and I will refer you to the original paper from Cranfield. But the 3rd and the most important is the social and political one. Now, being Carole and being biased as I am, you see, I saw this and I went straight to the social political and I dismissed the other 2 as not being relevant. No, I'm joking, but please nab me. So do drop me an email afterwards if you want more detail.
Carole, that was a truly great talk. Thank you very much indeed. I think what you've covered is incredibly important for many of us, including myself. And the models, I really like the models. They are models that I think I can remember under stressful conditions because they are pithy and simple enough, but they are nevertheless powerful enough to be able to deploy them to good effect under those stressful conditions. So thank you very much indeed for that. And I hope you've enjoyed it, and apologies to you for some of the technical glitches on the way through, but you seem to sail through that. So thank you very much indeed. And I'd also like to thank the audience, who we've got a very healthy audience. Thank you very much for turning up. Very few people have gone off to do their emails or to have their dinner, so that I find very encouraging. And thank you for your questions and your participation in the poll. I'd also like to thank the committee as well. Simon and Antonio have been visible, but there's Colin behind the scenes looking after the technology as well, Colin Pearson. So thank you very much. And back to you, Carole. Thank you very much indeed. And with that, I think, unless my other committee members have anything to add, or Carole, you have some final comments, I think we can close it down and allow people to go to dinner. And thank you for your email address, Carole. People can contact you directly if they need to. Any final comments?
I want to say thank you to everyone from me.
Okay, thank you. All right, so for everybody on the committee, the speaker, and the attendees, thank you very much indeed. We'll now close down the webinar and look forward to seeing you at future events of CONSIG and other parts of the BCS. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.